Number 10. Emily Lewis. In August 2020, Emily Lewis was the victim of a speedboat accident. It was 10:11 a.m. on the 22nd of the month when the boat's captain drove straight into a 15-foot tall, 4.6-meter buoy, causing the injuries of Emily and many other passengers. The captain, Michael Lawrence, drove into the buoy even as passengers screamed at him to stop, but he didn't listen. Nikki Lewis, Emily's mother, said she was in shock as she watched her daughter slowly die. Emily suffered brutal chest injuries from being crushed. After the boat crashed, Michael was one of the few people not injured. Instead of helping people around him, he paced up and down the boat and played on his phone. He didn't help anyone, he just called a friend. Michael was charged with manslaughter by gross negligence. The 55-year-old man was also charged with failing to maintain a proper lookout and failing to drive at a safe speed. He wasn't the only person in trouble for this either. Michael Howley, the owner of the company that managed the speedboat trip, was accused of not operating safely. He too could face serious punishment for his role in Emily's unfortunate death if found guilty. Number 9. Daniel Couch. A boat captain in Florida has been charged in a deadly parasailing incident. Daniel Gavin Couch was behind on Memorial Day 2022. One of his passengers was a 33-year-old Illinois woman named Supriya. She was with her son and her nephew. It was a big family outing, and everyone was having a blast parasailing in the Florida Keys until the captain made a terrible mistake. According to the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, Daniel cut the line holding Supriya and the boys. Daniel said it was because the parasail was dragging in winds kicked up by a sudden storm, but he didn't bother worrying about the 3 people still attached to the parasail. The victims were dragged aggressively across the waves for miles before they slammed into the 7-mile bridge. It was as if they were tied to the back of a car and dragged over pavement. Even though it was painfully clear the 3 were in serious trouble, with Supriya literally drowning, the captain did nothing to help them. He didn't bother to even drive under the bridge to help the family, even though according to the arrest warrant they begged him to help. He just drove away like nothing happened, and the captain of a different boat took the poor victims to shore. Sadly, Supriya died from her injuries. The only justice is that Daniel has at least been arrested and charged for her death. He didn't get off easy either, but was charged on 1 full count of manslaughter and 5 counts of violating parasailing statutes. He'll be living behind bars for quite some time. Number 8. Andrew Santiago. Yet another boat captain from Florida was charged with manslaughter, this time involving an engaged couple. Nicholas Hayward from Costa Rica and his bride-to-be, Azalea Silva from Texas, visited Florida on a parasailing expedition in July 2020. On the day of their adventure, they planned to get on the boat and go parasailing with a company named Sunset Water Sports. Their boat captain that day was 33-year-old Andrew Santiago. Andrew was experienced enough to know that the winds were too high and that the tour should have ended early that day. Instead, he helped the couple get into the air on parasails around noon, right as it seemed the wind was getting worse. As you can imagine, parasailing in these conditions is a dangerous game. The couple's parasail immediately swayed horizontally, causing the boat to lift off the water. The parasailers dropped out of the sky, hit the waves, and the tow line separated from the boat. This caused both Hayward and Silva to drag through the water for about 9 minutes until the parasail deflated on its own. Hayward died during the accident because they drowned while being pulled through the water. Silva lost consciousness and was treated at the hospital for a traumatic brain injury, but still passed away about a year or so later. Andrew Santiago's poor judgment ended in a manslaughter charge and a wrongful death lawsuit on behalf of the victim's family. Number 7. Yori Chaplinski. Yori Chaplinski was a ship captain responsible for the worst accident on the Danube River in well over 50 years. He recently went on trial in Hungary for his role in the deadly Budapest crash that claimed the lives of 25 South Korean tourists. The crash also killed 2 Hungarian crew members that day. It happened during an intense rainstorm on May 29, 2019. Yori was behind the wheel of the Viking Sign, a huge cruise liner. He drove right into a small tourist boat that was tucked underneath a bridge in the capital. The Viking cruise liner was significantly larger than the boat, plowing through it like a massive battering ram. All 27 victims were on the smaller vessel called the Mermaid. It sank within seconds, and almost no one survived. The biggest issue for the rescue crews was the weather. It was raining heavily and there were strong currents. Many of the victims' bodies were found dozens of miles downstream. Only 7 tourists were rescued, and that was just barely. It was a horrific day for everyone involved. The blame was placed solely on Yori. The 64-year-old captain was charged with reckless misconduct, leading to mass casualties. He was also charged with 35 counts of failure to provide assistance. He was, according to prosecutors, distracted for some personal reasons that weren't disclosed. He didn't even radio or send emergency sound signals out for help. He also failed to offer aid to those drowning after the collision, and that was after he crashed into the mermaid while he wasn't paying attention. Number 6. Joseph Hazelwood. Joseph Hazelwood was the captain of the Exxon Valdez back in 1989. You might remember the ship for its legendary oil spill. It was one of the greatest disasters in tanker history. The ship eventually ran aground in the Prince William Sound on March 24th and spilled its cargo of crude oil into the sea. The ship, which was owned by the Exxon Shipping Company, released about 31.7 million gallons, 120,000 kiloliters into the sea, the second largest oil spill in United States history. That being said, it was only the 54th largest oil spill in human history. The captain was Joseph Hazelwood. He was accused of being drunk at the time of the incident, which was a major contributor to the disaster. In 1990, at his trial, witnesses testified that he was sober. Joseph later admitted that he drank 2 or 3 vodkas before crashing the boat, but insisted he wasn't fully drunk. His crew backed him up on the matter, but Hazelwood was still convicted of negligent discharge of oil. He was fined $50,000 and ordered to complete 1,000 hours of community service. Number 5. The Smuggler. The captain of the Elita was arrested in November 2021 by Spain's Guardia Civil for human trafficking. The man was in charge of a livestock carrier, but it wasn't just cows and pigs he was carrying. Authorities believe the captain was part of an elite, organized crime syndicate. The crime ring was involved in exploiting Syrians and other nationals of war-torn countries experiencing poverty and other hardships. These people, so desperate to leave their homes, were loaded onto the boat and smuggled into Europe. When the boat was inspected by authorities, the humans being transported tried to disguise themselves as workers. But it didn't work. Spanish police had already been alerted to an extremely covert scheme to bring people into Spain on cattle boats, so they knew the scoop. When the boat docked at the port of Cartagena, authorities went on board and found the illegal human cargo. Those being smuggled didn't have the proper paperwork and clearly didn't understand how to work on a ship. There were about 10 individuals, each of whom had paid about $15,000 to be brought into Europe. The captain, while not the mastermind of the operation, was certainly on board with the plan. He knew what he was doing. Number 4. The Kingpin. In Western Australia, a cargo ship master was arrested and charged with bringing $128 million worth of illegal cocaine into his country. That's just over 700 pounds or 320 kilos. It happened in May 2022, with local news sources giving him the nickname Captain Coke. The drugs came from unknown regions. The captain, a national of Montenegro, waited until he was in Australian waters to dump the packages of cocaine, wrapped in plastic, in the ocean off the coast of Port Hedland. Once he finished, 2 other men, a German and a local Australian, used a smaller boat to pick the illegal substances up from the water that night. They found the floating packages and quickly brought them to shore, and that's when they were busted by police officers. The cops claim they found a man in a camper van with the shipment of cocaine divided into 320 separate blocks. The police have been fairly vague on where they got their original information. We don't know if they had an inside man, a narc, who sold out the captain and his accomplices, or someone else. But the authorities claim they will be relentless in pursuing anyone who tries bringing drugs into their country. Deputy Commissioner Blanche said the objective of the team is to systematically pull apart all syndicates responsible for trafficking illegal drugs into Western Australia. Number 3. Theodore Essenfeld. Not every captain makes their mistakes at sea. 51-year-old Navy Captain Theodore Essenfeld, with 31 years of service, was arrested in February 2023. The Navy captain was charged with cyber-stalking his former girlfriend. The captain, on the outside, seemed like a perfectly ordinary human being. For over 3 decades, he gave his life in service of the Navy, and yet underneath the surface, He was a truly sick stalker. He launched a campaign of terror against his ex that lasted a shocking 18 months. Theodore went through some extraordinarily disturbing lengths to terrorize the woman he supposedly once loved. He made a fake profile of her, then posted private images all over the internet in an attempt to ruin her life. Theodore was charged with cyberstalking and could face 5 years in prison if found guilty. According to the indictment, it all started when Theodore and his ex-girlfriend started dating in 2018 while living in San Diego. Theodore had just finished a tour as the commanding officer of the USS Pearl Harbor. The pair moved to Colorado together, but later broke up in August 2021. The truly shocking part is that almost a year before, in 2020, Captain Theodore was already plotting his revenge. He was registering email accounts and social media profiles in his girlfriend's name before they ever broke up. He even purchased a disposable cell phone in her name. He had every intention of terrorizing this woman if she ever left him, and when she actually did, that's exactly what happened. The commander of 2 warships is now almost certainly going to be kicked out of the Navy for his behavior, and maybe even jailed. Number 2. William Stewart. One of the worst ship captains in history was named William Stewart. He was the captain of the Mary Russell back in 1828. The boat was a trading vessel which sailed from County Cork in Ireland on February 8th with a cargo of mules for Barbados. When it returned to Ireland on June 25, 1828, 7 crew members were dead. The captain had gone insane and tried to kill every man on board. William was born in Ireland in 1775 and was a devout Protestant. His chief mate was a Scotsman named William Smith. His second mate was Swedish and also shared the name William. And then there were 4 other men named John, Francis, Henry, and Daniel. There was also another captain named James Rains on board, who was simply a passenger on his way back to Ireland. He had previously been relieved of his command for public drunkenness. In the middle of the journey, Captain Stewart started growing suspicious of his crew. He had a dream in which they mutinied against him, the mutiny led by James Rains. As the paranoia and insanity guided him, the captain began plotting. He eventually went about tying up 7 men, fixing them to the floor, and then killing them with either a crowbar or an axe. At his trial in August 1828, Captain Stewart was found not guilty by reason of insanity, which is fair considering the circumstances. Number 1. Jerry Boylan. The Conception erupted into flames after a fire broke out on board the scuba diving vessel in September 2019. The captain, Jerry Boylan of Santa Barbara, was largely deemed responsible. When the boat caught on fire off the California coast, it sank and took 34 people down with it. Jerry was charged with 34 counts of seaman's manslaughter due to his gross negligence. Jerry may not have killed anyone on purpose, but he also didn't run a very tight ship. He failed to properly train his crew, never conducted the necessary fire drills, and didn't have a night watchman. Nobody was awake and aware when the diving vessel burst into flames. If there had been a night watchman, many lives could have been saved. Jerry himself was snoring soundly when something caught fire and spread to the rest of the ship. Every last passenger was killed. In 2022, Jerry pleaded not guilty to the charge of misconduct and negligence. The trial is still ongoing, with Jerry now 70 years old. Would you rather have a bad ship captain on your next boat trip or a drunk pilot on your next flight? Let me know what's scarier in the comments, and thanks for watching. Remember to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and come back soon for more awesome videos.